First of all, thank you all for joining us for our first webinar of our Eversheds Sutherland Breakfast Club. Thank you for joining us such a sunny, lovely morning, and I hope you have your tea and coffee at the ready for this session. Before we get started, I just want to give you, I suppose, a very, very brief intro to Eversheds Sutherland and who we are. So we're the only All-Ireland fully serviced international law firm, and we're based across the globe. We have 68 offices in 32 countries, and that would span Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and the US. So we merged with the US in 2017, and we have 8 bases there. And on the island of Ireland, we have our Dublin and Belfast office, and we'd very much work together in a collaborative partnership to provide legal advice to mainly business clients, and that would be predominantly Ireland's largest and progressive companies, but also smaller, innovative and exciting companies also. And I suppose what's very attractive about Eversheds Sutherland, not only for our clients but our employees, is that we do have that international piece and we do work across the globe. You know, to be able to serve as a client seamlessly across maybe their many European offices or offices in different jurisdictions is usually important to us. And it's fantastic that we can work so closely with our international colleagues and on international projects. But you're all logged on today to find out how you can nail these virtual interviews. And I suppose today's session is all about getting some tips and tricks. You know, this time last year, we would never have thought that we were going to be running our grad campaign online. We were hoping to get out to campuses and meet you all. And I don't think students or graduates would have ever thought they were going to possibly do most of their interviews virtually and possibly most of your socializing as well. So today we have 2 panelists. They're going to talk you through, you know, what is different about that virtual interview to the face-to-face interview. What do you need to bear in mind? And what we'd like is that you walk away from this session feeling a little bit more confident about that virtual interview, so that when you do walk out of your bedroom or your kitchen or wherever you are this morning on the day the day of your interview, that you feel that you did the best that you could. And at the end of the session, we'll also touch on, you know, Eversheds Sutherland. What is our process this year, and what do we look for at interview and at virtual interview? You should all see a Q&A box at the end of your screen. So we would encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. Feel free to fry them in that box throughout the session, and we'll veer towards them so that you get the most out of this session. You're directing a little bit more. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our panel today, and I would ask them to introduce themselves. So I might start with yourself there, Tara.
Thanks a million, Orla, and welcome everybody to the virtual interview webinar. My name is Tara Lockheed. I'm the HR Director here in Eversheds Sutherland. I've been with the firm for about 5 years, but all in all, I probably have about 20 years experience in HR roles at various levels in top tier law firms. So I kind of have a sense of Eversheds Sutherland and also some of the other law firms around town. So hopefully, as Orla had said, we'll be able to give you a sense of what's different about a virtual interview, and also about the Eversheds Sutherland's interviews and how we approach things like that. So that's myself. So I'll pass over to Keane, if that's okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Cian McGinley. I'm a partner in our real estate department. I'm also on the trainee committee. I actually trained in Eversheds Sutherland. I interviewed back in 2000, and I started in January 2002. So at that time, I was doing the milk rounds. I think it was my 7th interview before I landed a job, so it took me a bit of practice to get into the swing of things. So I have come through the firm as a trainee, to a solicitor, to an associate, and now currently a partner. So over the last 10 years or so, I've done a lot of interviews with trainees and interns. So I know what a good interview looks like. So I guess the challenge will be what a good virtual interview looks like, and hopefully we can help you with that today.
Great. Thank you both. And I suppose to get started and to get straight into it, you know, first impressions. Tara, I might throw this question at you. How important are first impressions, and what do we need to bear in mind with the virtual interview for first impressions?
Yeah, of course, Orla. So, I mean, as we all know, first impressions, whether it's virtual or otherwise, are very important. And it's not a huge difference between the virtual and the face-to-face, in that the prep is key to both. So the prep and the organization that you complete before the interview is the main piece to it. So a lot of the stuff that myself and Keane will run through today and this morning is very probably obvious to a lot of people, and you'll be sitting there going, well, I kind of know that, but it's a key. It's just kind of picking up one or two things that will assist with it. So what I would say to you, in a virtual kind of setting, make sure that the basics are right. So make sure your lighting is right. And what I mean by that is I have my PC put this way. If I turn my PC to the left, as Keane will tell you, some of the meetings that I have had it like that, there's a huge light coming into me, and I look very angelic, which is beautiful, but for the person on the other side, it's a little bit off-putting. What I would say to you, again, this is quite obvious, but make sure your PC is charged and plugged in. Be very aware of your surroundings and what is visible. So if you're interviewing for Eversheds Sutherland, I wouldn't sit there with a big another firm's book or anything behind them. Just be careful that it's tidy and together. I would say, and in the days of us all moving to virtual, we've all been showing our personalities through Zoom meetings. So I mean, we've all been in the meetings where a dog will run in, or you're a child or a brother and sister, or there'll be noise in the background, and that's fine when you're in internal meetings because it kind of shows your personality. But I would say to you, for an interview setting, that just ensure that your surrounding is quiet and there's no interruptions. Close over the door. If you share a space, or if you're sharing a house, to let people know that you're in an interview. And the reason being is, for the interviewers, it's not a big deal, but you will be put off if somebody walks in and puts you off your stride. What I would say to you is, on certain PCs and emails, notifications come through. So if you're on the other side of that and you're in the middle of chatting or asking a question and it keeps beeping, it is off-putting. So I would say to everybody to remind to put off their notifications. Very important is to check the link probably about 15 minutes before the interview, because if there's any technical issues, at least you have a little bit of a time to breathe and get it right. And also you'll be able to sit there and see your surroundings. So it makes you more comfortable and confident if you need to move things. For example, when I was on the first time, I sat here and then I spotted that there was a water bottle up there that was off-putting. So, things like that you'll notice and you can move them away. It's okay to have water on your desk. So kind of if you suffer from nerves or dry throat, have a glass of water, so that'll be in the prep so you don't need to leave. And the one thing that I've learned when I'm carrying out presentations or interviews is, make sure you either have your CV behind your screen or the main points of your CV that you want to get across, or the questions. And the reason being, some people get nervous that they're going to forget that. So it's important to have those behind you. And I'm actually going to show you, pardon, this is probably very unprofessional, but if you see there behind my PC, I've put up some stickers, and that's just to remind me of some of the points that I'd like to get across today. So I found that really important, because it means you can just cast your eyes up, see the main points that you want to get across, so you don't come off the interview going, I should have asked that, or do you know what, that was the main point and that really would have clinched it for me and I just forgot in the nerves of the interview. So that's kind of what I'd say from the first impressions and how to prep for a virtual interview as opposed to a face-to-face. So I hope that was of some help.
Yeah, and I think, Tara, leading on from, the first impression, something else that gives an impression is, and I think we have to talk about it, because you think about it in the lead up to your interview, what do I wear? And is that different, virtually to face-to-face? So what do you say is the dress code, Tara?
Actually, within a virtual interview, it's actually much easier, because in the face-to-face interviews, for anybody that has interviewed for summer interns and traineeship, it's all that piece of, I have to make a first impression when I come in on what I'm wearing, and then I have to go into the room, and then I have to be comfortable and be able to walk down a corridor and sit there and, not be pulling at my clothes or feeling uncomfortable. So to a certain extent, a virtual interview is much easier in that perspective. What I would say to you, though, is don't go too casual. And the reason I say that is not for any reason. We have interviewers, as Keane will probably let you know, that are very casual, in the way they dress smartly, obviously, but they're quite casual in their day-to-day. And we've other interviewers that would be a little bit more, that they would wear a shirt and jacket and tie, and you don't know what your interviewer is going to be like or what style that they have. So what I would say to you is dress smartly. There's no need really for a shirt and tie. I don't think that's probably required, but I would say for, to wear a shirt and make sure that you feel comfortable and smart, not a hoodie or, a t-shirt with slogans. So it is that piece of smart. What I'd always say though as well is that that dress and whatever makes you feel confident. So if it is a case that a suit, you know, makes you feel confident, then wear it. It's not, there's nothing negative to that. So it's really stay smart, dress that's something that makes you confident in what you're wearing, and most of all be comfortable, because you don't want to be pulling at either a suit or a skirt or a dress through the interview. So they'd be the main things. It's actually easier from a virtual interview point from a dress code, but it is that piece that it's very focused, as you can see in the screen, it's very focused on your top half of your body. So just make sure you're confident and that you're not looking at yourself going, I shouldn't have worn that. So that's my head to toe moment there.
Absolutely, your stylist moment. Thanks, Tara. So Cian, just for yourself there, is there anything different you would advise for the virtual interview?
Yeah, there's a whole number of issues that you can that will be different, but then there are things that you need to do the same as well. So as Tara mentioned, I think you should prep the same way as you would with a normal interview. So you need to know your CV, you need to know your application, you need to know the firm, you need to know what work it does. For example, we had some candidates talk to us about human rights and criminal law, which we don't practice. So it's not a great first impression. It would also help if you knew who you were interviewing with, because it helps build a better rapport. And also then if you know the values of the firm, then you can allude to those values throughout the interview, and that's always really helpful. So then the things that you can do differently, or what might be different for a virtual interview, I think you should practice doing a video interview prior to the actual interview, because we all practice when we're doing interviews face to face with people. So why wouldn't we practice with a video interview? And I think it's important to get used to yourself on camera. And I mean, this time 6 months ago, I'd never heard Zoom. I wasn't doing Zoom calls. Now we do 3 or 4 Zoom calls a day, and it's a different skill to be able to communicate over video. There's different things to think about that you wouldn't usually think about. So again, practice seeing yourself on video calls. So other points is sometimes it's harder to read the room. So maybe stay away from jokes or icebreakers, because you might not know who you're dealing with in terms of the interviewers. I liked Tara's crib sheets that she had. My view is stay away from pre-planned or scripted answers insofar as you can, because then it doesn't flow as naturally. And you can always tell if somebody's trying to squeeze an answer into a question that's not quite right. So a couple other points. I think certain virtual interviews can be, or a virtual interview could be more pronounced, or certain aspects of that interview could be more pronounced. So just to be aware of that. So don't be overly familiar, don't be too cold. But it's all about striking the balance, because at the end of the day, the firm has to be a good match for you. So it has to work both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is all about being yourself. And Cian, you touched on something there, knowing the firm and knowing who, when you're going to the firm, know what they do and a little bit about their culture. And I think, Tara might add to this, but some top tips on that is, a lot of people will go to the website and they'll read the website. But what's even better than that is, our social media. So if you go to our Instagram page, you'll see what our trainees are getting up to, what we're doing on our green committee. And that gives you a much more, it's a stronger insight to the firm, so that you can mention some of those points in interview. And then we've got a sense, okay, well, they've researched us, they know us. So sometimes I do think the Instagrams and the LinkedIn's, in LinkedIn, you can see some of the partners, some of the articles they're writing, some of the work that they've done. Everybody will read the website, and definitely do. But if you veer towards the LinkedIn and the Instagram, you'll actually maybe get an insight that you might not find on the website. And that'll help you just to get a sense of us and who we are and what we do. And Cian also mentioned rapport and building rapport. And, we've often said, even when we started our Zooms at the start of lockdown, we were wondering how we'd manage, our Zoom calls and talking to our colleagues and talking to clients and whatnot. Tara, often it is said that it can be a little bit trickier online to build rapport. What's your advice around that for the graduates and students?
Yeah, I mean, that is the one big negative of Zoom interviews. And even before lockdown, when we carried out our interviews in previous years, we would have carried out Zoom interviews for candidates that were abroad and could get back for the times. And they were at a disadvantage to a certain extent due to that rapport piece, but they did get over that, and it will be the same for everybody because everybody's being judged and interviewed on the same level. The couple of things that I'd mention on that is, and Cian had touched on it, is you can't read a room. That's the main thing. So there's certain things to keep away from because you can't read a room. Some people get quite nervous and they try and have an icebreaker. It's nearly like a best man speech that falls flat. So I mean, just be careful. You can't read a room. So the jokes or trying to kind of have an icebreaker really can fall flat on a Zoom interview. Sometimes it's fine, but sometimes it can fall flat. And you find if you do that at the start, the person gets very nervous and knows that, and all they're doing is focusing on the fact that their icebreaker hasn't worked. So just be calm is the main thing, and just really be yourself. And I know Cian touched on that, but that is the main thing on it, is building rapport, is just being yourself, answering the questions that are asked, and just letting the interview flow a little bit. So it is the piece that is the hardest, but if you just be yourself, you know, calm, and ask the questions that are answered, that rapport will happen naturally. Because the flip side of it is that to build a rapport, you're going to have, with the Eversheds Sutherland interviews, there's 2 interviewees. So the screens will be popping because we'll all be at home. The interviewers won't be together. So they'll be popping as they are there from one screen to the other. So it can be quite confusing. So just to kind of take your time and breathe and be yourself.
Yeah, and I think one thing, Tara, sometimes we find feedback, you know, if a candidate's particularly nervous, that can affect rapport. So in a few minutes, we might talk about, we might ask Tara to give a little bit of advice around controlling those nerves. And rapport is all about being yourself as well. And that's all we want to see, is we want an interview to get to know you. You know, it's conversational style. You know, there's no trick questions. We really just want to get to know who you are, and whether you'd be a good fit for us, and whether we're a good fit for you, I suppose. And Tara and Cian, you know, screen the applications each year. So when they come in, they're also involved in the screening process. And what you can find with the application process is sometimes there's gaps on CVs, or sometimes grades can vary on CVs. So they often, what an interviewer like to do is they like to delve into that a little bit more in interview. So why is there a gap? Or why were your grades maybe a little bit lower and then you took a jump up? So Cian, in terms of discrepancies and gaps, you know, how can, if this brought up an interview, do you answer it? How do you manage it? What advice have you got on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a hard question because it really depends on what the discrepancy is. My own view is you can't change the past, so there's no point being too defensive or evasive about it, because that doesn't come across well in an interview. So if it does come up, obviously you're not going to be bringing it up yourself, but if it does come up, it's how you manage it. You know, point to what you've done, point to a recent success, point to a change that's been made, and try and steer the conversation your way. So have an idea of how you're going to steer that before you actually carry out, or before you actually turn up in the interview. As you said, Orla, you know, interviewers aren't looking to catch anyone out. So everyone's going to have a different backstory. Everyone's going to have a different route to get to the same place. So it's not really a big issue if it's just managed correctly. But it's all about the prep work to have a think about how you're going to manage that if that situation arose in the interview.
Yeah. And Tara, I might just pull you in on this conversation, because I know last week, I mean, you were only talking about the grades, and we have often see students jumped from maybe, you know, 2-2 or 3-3 up to a first. What's your thoughts around that, and how they talk about that in interview, and what you expect from that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the main questions we're asked when we go around to the careers fairs, or we have presentations of this nature. Is it's even outside of the results, there's one thing people have on their CV that they're kind of going, do I put it in, do I not put it in? It doesn't flow as well. So as Cian said, don't hide from things. So I mean, if you have an average leaving cert, now anybody that's doing law or has gone into college won't have an average leaving cert, but just say, for example, your leaving cert isn't as strong as you want it to be. There could be a reason behind that. Don't be afraid to let the interviewers know. Don't try and gloss over it. The chances are, though, as well, is that you've gotten into college and now you're doing well in college. So kind of say, listen, that's the reason, but I focused and here's where I went. Then alternatively, when you're in college, you could have a dip. So you could be a 2-1 and then you average to a 2-2, or you could be a 1-1 and then to a 2-1. So don't be afraid to kind of, there's usually a reason behind it. And if there's not a reason, that's okay to say. Just say, I had, you know, the exams didn't suit me, I had a bit of a dip, and that's fine. But as Cian says, you go, but I have this work experience that kind of complements this, or I have this. So kind of turn a negative, and what you see as a negative, we may not see it as a negative, and turn it to a positive. And that's by kind of, it's like, don't look over here, look here. So kind of move the interview across somewhat to something a little bit more positively. I think, is that what you're asking, Orla? Is that, have I answered
absolutely.
that for you?
Yeah, because this actually comes up more often than you would think. And what I would also say is, you may have looked at the Eversheds with an application, and you know, you have to insert, you know, your leaving cert results and your university results, but there is a box and it says, you know, if there's any reasons that maybe you don't, that you have mitigating reasons why you maybe failed an exam or didn't do well in an exam, insert the reason here. So it may not come up in an interview, the interviewer may read that and, you know, may not want to talk about it at all, but there is a box there for you on your application to maybe put in the reasons there, if you wish to do so. So a question has just come in from the group, very good question. What question do you commonly see answered poorly in the interview? Tara, Cian, would either of you like to take that?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
We generally ask, it's a question we also have in the application form. Why law, or why are you applying to a commercial law firm? And it's a difficult question to answer, but the key for us is not really the content of the answer; it's how you answer it, to how you communicate your point. So people get bogged down in and talk about their, you know, they might say they have a relative in law and they always wanted to go that way, or they love law, and they're kind of real high level points. But when you think about it, we're a commercial law firm. You know, we're not trying to attract people just because they love law. You know, they need to be commercially astute. They need to be able to communicate well. So, yeah, people do get bogged down in that answer because it's too high level, when they should just nail it back down to you know, an example of commercial awareness and why they really want to work in a commercial law firm as opposed to a criminal law firm or be a barrister or the like. So that's the one question we see certainly catching a few people out. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think another thing, and actually I might throw to one of the panel later, another thing in interview that I tend to hear feedback from the partners that catches people out all the time is commercial awareness. But we'll touch on that, because you might say, well, what is the expectation of my commercial awareness? You know, what level am I expected to be at, you know, if I'm applying for an internship or a traineeship? So we might touch on that later. But Eva, thank you so much for that question. It was a really good question. Any other questions, please fire them into the Q&A. Sorry, there's just another one that's come in. Would you recommend wearing a headphone or headset during the virtual interview? Tara, you might take that one.
Yeah, it's really of what's benefit to yourself. If it is something that you need to kind of hear better, as in from the screen or noise outside, or it makes you feel more comfortable, by all means. There's no right or wrong to that. It's whatever suits yourself. From a interviewer point of view, it's not off-putting. You know, we have Zoom meetings where we might have 7 or 8 people within the firm, and some people have their Apple iPhone pieces in, and other people have headphones, and other people they're in an environment where the sound is fine. So whichever you feel more comfortable with, there's no negative to that one.
Great. That's great, thank you. So Tara, I might put this to yourself. What does a poor virtual interview look like to you?
Okay, thanks, Orla. I mean, again, similarly, a poor virtual interview is quite similar to a poor interview face-to-face. But the things on a virtual piece just to be aware of is, in a face-to-face, there's distractions. A virtual interview is quite intense because a person is looking, the interviewers are looking at this box, and the person that is interviewing is talking into a screen. So there's certain things that can be a little bit more pronounced with the virtual interview, and that's things like if you're a person that gets nervous and can't look face to face. When you look down at a virtual interview like that and not looking at the screen because your nerves are getting the best of you, or you're looking out a window, it's very pronounced. So if you can see, when you can kind of get away with it a little bit easier when you're face to face, but when it's just this piece that somebody is focusing on, it's very pronounced. So just to be aware of your screen and your eye level. So what I would say to you is, I have a book under my laptop at the moment. You know, that's kind of all in the prep. Just practice that it's kind of at eye level and you stay at that and you're not looking around. A few of the things that we've touched on already, but a poor interview is really not knowing your CV. I mean, that's what the interviewers are focused on. It's your CV and your application. And if you don't know that, it just shows that you haven't put enough due care into the process and enough prep for the interview. So I mean, you really need to know your CV and not be afraid or off-put by a question that comes from your CV or your application form. As I think Orly, you mentioned earlier, and I know Keane touched on it, you know, a poor interview is not knowing the firm, you know, not knowing the culture of the firm. And it is that piece of, you know, you say, why do you want to do law? And a person goes, well, I really am interested in human rights. I've always been interested in human rights. Or alternatively, they go, really interested in personal injury and that piece, or criminal law has always interested me. For Eversheds Sutherland, that's a poor interview because it shows that you don't necessarily know the firm, because that's not a practice area we have. By all means, if that's where your passion lies, that's absolutely there. But maybe Eversheds Sutherland isn't for yourself, or it is, if it is for yourself because you want to gain the corporate piece of it, you know, you can say that, but just knowing the firm. Again, what I would say is one-word answers, whether face-to-face or virtually, can come across as really poor. So kind of yes, no, maybe, you know, you really need to expand. There's a fine line between waffling on for 5 minutes, and it's very hard to cut that short in a virtual interview, because face to face you can kind of, the interviewer has more of a chance to kind of bring you back in, but virtually that can be hard. And also some things that we found on some of the meetings and interviews we've had since lockdown is, if a person is too laid back. So if a person is too laid back and they're kind of back on their chair and they're kind of, yeah, whatever, that really comes across badly. And then if somebody's very confident as well, so they're very intense and confident and really want to get their points across and want to get their points across now, again, because it's so pronounced in this small screen, it can be very hard to get that level right. So the main pieces of a poor interview, I'd say to you, is from a virtual perspective, make sure you're looking at the screen and not too distracted around yourself. Know your CV, know the firm, have no one-word answers, and just be yourself. And kind of, you know, for the half an hour, 40 minutes that you've been interviewed, just sit up straight and answer the questions that are asked, and just be aware of this screen being your piece. So I hope that helps somewhat.
Yeah, and I think, Tara, that culture piece has come up a couple of times, and I think it's because it's so important. Some of you here on the call may know interns working here, or trainees working here, or friends. You know, don't be afraid to call on them before you interview. Say, look, I have an interview. Can I have a quick chat with you? The virtual careers fairs are coming up, and you know, people will often ask at virtual careers fairs, you know, the process of the traineeship, or when the application's open, when it's closing, and all that can be found online. But what I'd really advise you to do is, when you meet the recruiters virtually this year, you know, to ask them, what is your culture? Do you like working in Eversheds Sutherland? What sort of initiatives could I get involved in? And you can take that from the careers fair and use it all in interview as well. And again, it just shows interest, it shows initiative. And what we want to see is, we want to see people coming through who want to work with Eversheds Sutherland. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. Is it okay to mention the specific area you would like to specialise in the interview? Keane, I might give that question to you if that's okay.
Yeah, I was actually going to touch on that as part of what Eversheds would look at, because my own personal view is that I don't think you should, because I think it shows some degree of, well, if you think about it, you haven't actually started in a law firm. You might have had a bit of experience, but you haven't done your traineeship where you get to practice in 3 or 4 different areas. So I would prefer somebody to be open up for a challenge, rather than somebody to come in quite close and say, this is exactly where I want to work, because they did well in college. I know it's an easy thing to do. So if you ace your intellectual property exams, you say, okay, Eversheds Sutherland has a strong intellectual property team. That's where I want to work. And then if you're being interviewed by me in real estate, or by somebody else in litigation, and we're hearing that this person must work in this particular area. It just seems quite closed. And it's great that you can have that strong view, but from an interview perspective, I think you just keep that to yourself, and that you'd be a little bit open, or you certainly come across as a little bit more open.
Yeah. And that's an interesting question, because as Keane said, what I find, I'd work very closely with the trainees, and they might rotate in a department and they say, look, Orla, I know this is probably not going to be to my strengths, and this is probably not the area that I'm going to want to work in, but sure, look, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do my best. And then towards the end of the rotation, they come back to me and say, I loved it. I didn't realise what was actually involved in that department. So it's good just to keep an open mind. I do find our trainees tend to do that. An area that they might not have thought they'd, one, do well in, or two, that they'd enjoy, they actually come away really enjoying it, and maybe an area that they consider down the line for the newly qualified stage. That's great, Keane. Thanks for answering that. Another question that's come in, and Tara, I might throw this to yourself. What should the profile section of a CV contain?
Sorry, I'm not too sure what you mean by the profile section. Can you clarify, either Orla or the person who answers, as in, is that your interests and your achievements, or what piece is that?
Yeah, I could be wrong. So if the person would like to type in what they think, but I think, Tara, that might be, which is not something we really have in the application. What I take from the profile is that intro piece, the very start of your CV, maybe, you know, who you are, why you're interested in working for a firm. But we'll see if maybe a response comes back into that question. And if we don't get back to it, I can give the candidate a buzz.
Perfect.
On our application, we don't actually have like a particular profile section. It's more sections. Tara, do you want to maybe just give a brief overview of the application in terms of what it looks like? That might assist with that question.
The application form?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, of course, and apologies if I've misread the question, so apologies on that. I'm happy to answer anything that comes through. The application form, and Orla will probably correct me completely on this, is it has the general, so it has your education experience, so kind of your results and where you went to college, and then it moves on to kind of your leaving cert results, and then there's certain questions, and the questions are about why you want to work in a law firm, and kind of what, you know, or actually, do you know what, you're probably better placed, and it's because it sounds like, I know the application form may be changing this year, and I know you're working on that, so you might be better placed to go through that.
Yeah, well, it is similar to what Sarah said, and I actually find when you're filling out the application form, it's really good you've loads of time to do it. You can log in and out and save it. So to break it down into the sections. So the first section is very much your personal details. The second section is your education. So your secondary school education and results, your university results as well, and any masters that you might have done. We do ask for FE1s as well. A question that I do get asked a lot about FE1s is, do I need to have started or completed the FE1s to, you know, apply for a traineeship? Absolutely not. You certainly have to have them done to start the traineeship, but we've often recruited people for our traineeships with no FE1s. Where that comes into play is if Tara applied for the traineeship and she had 8 FE1s and I applied and I had 2, Tara maybe put in an earlier intake and I maybe put in a later intake to give me that little bit more time to sit those FE1s and complete them. We also ask about your work experience. So what we're looking for there is really delve into the level of responsibility. And actually we were on a panel discussion last week, and you know, we were talking about whether you have to have legal work experience or not. And it's okay if you don't, but you really then need to delve into the level of responsibility that you have, maybe your part-time job or your weekend job. Are there skills from that part-time job or weekend job that you can pull into a law firm? So for example, my example that I always say to students, if you work in your local retail store or shop or whatever that might be, you know, you're working with customers, we're working with clients. So how can you collide that? I'm sure your communication is tested in the retail industry, and you'll be communicating a lot in terms of written skills and speaking skills here. So it's just trying to link it a little bit more. And then at the back of the application, and I think this is where students find it most tricky really, is that the why Eversheds Sutherland, why do you want to work for us, and why law? your teamwork question. It seems so simple, but a lot of people get caught up in the teamwork question. What you need to do there is think about the what, why, where, when, how sort of questions on your interests and your hobbies. And it's really including absolutely everything there. You know, don't sell yourself short. Include everything that you do, your commitment to them, how often you go to them, and what maybe you get out of them as well. So that's it's a long application, but you've plenty of time. And what I would proofread, and make sure there's no typos running through. Get a second pair of eyes on that application.
Can I just say one thing there, Orla, to add to that, and thank you very much. That is a prime example of how prep goes wrong. So in all my prep for today, in all my little sheet notes that I have on the screen, everything that I've done, I forgot to look at the new application form. So when Orla threw that question onto me, I absolutely froze. Now, luckily, I have an Orla beside me, so you won't have an Orla in the interview, but that is a prime example of how prep can go wrong. So I can pretend that that was a deliberate to show you how that can go wrong, but unfortunately, it wasn't. But that's just to give you a sense of, you can prep very much and think you have it all, and then something will be thrown in and it'll throw you a little bit. So apologies on that, and thank you, Orla, for catching that so beautifully.
No problem at all. Another question has come in. Keane, I might throw this to you about the commercial awareness, because we were going to talk about this, but it has come in from Anna. So how's your commercial awareness tested in an interview? Are specific questions asked by the interviewer, or are you expected to weave your own knowledge naturally into your answers throughout the interview?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And if you can do the latter, you'll be absolutely flying. Because I mean, commercial awareness will always come up in interviews with commercial law firms. I mean, if you think about it, we handle commercial transactions, commercial issues on a day-to-day basis for clients. So we're interested in attracting people who are tuned in commercially. And as lawyers, clients will just absolutely expect you and assume that you're a legal expert. So that's a given. So where you differentiate yourself is that if you know their business, you know their issues, you know their risks and challenges. And to be able to do that, you need to be commercially aware. So in terms of prepping for a commercial awareness question, and whether you're going to get specific questions on a particular case.
Oh, I think we might have lost Keane there.
Hand over the floor to the interviewee to give an example of something that was of interest. So my advice is that if you don't read newspapers generally, that you should read the business section of a newspaper for a couple of weeks before the interview, and find one business deal and maybe one legal case that really interests you, and be able to speak about it. Be ready for follow-up questions. You should know more about it than the interviewer. And if when the commercial awareness question comes up, that's how you direct and steer the conversation towards that. Rarely would somebody pull out an example of a case or a deal and ask the interview that, because clearly it's going to be a particular aspect. But like I said, find something that's interesting, because it comes across, if it doesn't come across great if you're kind of like waffling through an answer that you don't really know. I'll give you an example. When everyone was talking about Brexit, I can tell you now, in about 90% of our interviews, when we talked about commercial awareness and an example of something that caught your eye, Brexit came up. And then you had somebody who pulled out something completely interesting and novel, and it was just a breath of fresh air. And the same with the Apple case, the Apple tax case. That was 90% of the candidates were talking about that. So I'm not saying go off and find something obscure, but be yourself, find something that you're comfortable talking about. And then, yes, if you can weave through the commercial awareness point in all your answers, because we're a law firm, but we're a business. We're providing services for our clients. So we need people, like I said, who are commercially aware, because then that's the USP when it comes to attracting and retaining clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes students at careers fairs will say to me, I generally start to read the newspaper 2 weeks before my interview. That just won't be sufficient to give you the knowledge to answer a question that Keane might throw with you. So, start it now. Most of you will be law students, and maybe some of you aren't, and that's absolutely fine as well. But you should be interested in what's going on around you, and it should be something that you can even take 25 minutes a day to kind of read a business newspaper or a business podcast to keep you up to speed on things. That's a great question. Thank you so much. Another question we have in, and Tara, you were talking about, I suppose, appearance earlier, so I might throw this question to yourself. In terms of appearance, as a male, does having long curly hair make a poor first impression or show some personality?
Yeah, I mean, it's whatever the person, the interviewee feels comfortable with. So we're not asking people to change themselves, and you have to find a firm that matches your personality and your style. So it's not a negative and it's not a positive. But I would say is many years ago, I would have worked in a firm where, you know, beards were a no-no, genuinely were a no-no, because some of the interviewers felt that was, you know, just showed, you know, a bit of personality that wasn't what the firm wanted. But times have moved on from that, as Keane is there with his beard on, and there is no right or wrong. So if that's your personality and you're trying to fit a firm that fits into that personality, there's no need to change that. What I would say though, you know, you can have long curly hair and be smart, and you can have long curly hair and look a little bit, you know, not smart enough and too casual. So you kind of have to judge it yourself. We wouldn't say for people to go out and cut their hair or change who they are, but just be aware that it is an interview, and just be aware that it is a corporate law firm. So just to kind of make sure your style and your personality fits there.
Yeah, absolutely. Another really good question, and we were going to touch on this a little bit later. What is one of the best and worst questions to ask at the end of an interview? And Tara, I can see you nodding already, because we often talk about this ourselves. I might throw that to you.
Yeah, I mean, we were going to kind of touch on this a little bit, just about the questions on the end. And it really depends on the question, okay? The worst questions that were asked is when somebody asks for the sake of a question. So they feel that pressure. Do you know the way at the end of an interview, somebody will say, well, what do you want to ask? And they'll ask for the sake of it. So they'll ask around, what's your sick leave policy? What's your annual leave policy? Because they panic. And first of all, it doesn't come across well, but secondly, there's no thought put into it. You know, another thing, it's not about the question, but people sometimes have a tendency to try and catch the interviewer out, so that they will try and kind of be a little bit smart at the end of the interview to try and catch them out on some, as Keane said, obscure piece of law, or, you know, just to kind of show their knowledge in an area, they try and catch somebody out. So that can really fall flat. And also, what I would say to you is, every year there is a similar question that's asked, depending on what the year is. So, you know, I know you've mentioned the culture piece, and to ask around the culture piece, but last year that was the main question we were asked. And which is fine if that's genuinely what you want to know. But some people kind of asked it, and then you could see they were switching off because they felt, I've asked a question, it sounds a bit okay, but they weren't really genuinely interested in finding out what the answer is. So I would say to you is, find out what you genuinely want to know, because you will be interviewing for lots of different firms, and lots of different firms have different styles. So what do you want to know about Eversheds Sutherland? So ask that. If you don't have a question, I would say to you, don't feel you have to ask a question. How people handle that well is if they come to the end of it and it's been answered throughout, because as interviewers sometimes we'll touch on some of the pieces and you feel, actually, I haven't got a question to ask, it's all been answered. Don't be afraid to kind of turn it around a bit and say, actually, you've answered all my questions. I wanted to find out what the culture of Eversheds Sutherland was, but I think I got a sense of that from the style of the interview. You know, or from looking at the LinkedIn or your social media. But you know what, I think what I'd really like to tell you is like about me on this piece and how I would match that. So if there's anything from your cheat sheets, or if there's anything from your CV or application that you haven't got across and you're going, this is my piece, this is my, you know, piece that'll make me a little bit different, and the interviewers haven't asked about it, don't be afraid to end the interview saying, listen, I have no questions, but one thing I just want to let you know about myself before I leave is X. So, I mean, in relation to the good questions are the genuine questions, because there are no wrong questions. The bad questions are the questions that you just are asking for the sake of it and really have no interest, but feel, you know, either I want to catch them out, or, you know, what is the annual leave, or what is the sick leave policy? They will be the negative ones. So I hope that kind of answered that somewhat.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tara. And Keane, I might throw this question back to you, because someone again is just bringing it back to the commercial awareness, and it's a good question. So what should you do if the interviewer asks a question about a particular piece of news of case that you weren't aware of? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, how you react to the question rather than really what you say. So don't waffle your way through it. There's no harm in saying you don't quite understand what's being asked, or you don't quite know. So there's the issue that Tara was talking about, me getting notification. So yeah, there's, you know, if you ask the question again, or you're trying to steer it to another topic, so it'll give you a chance to regather your thoughts. But if you have no idea whatsoever, just say that. Say you don't know. But that the first thing you do when you leave the meeting will be educate yourself on that particular aspect. But that if you do want to talk about X, and that's whatever you do want to talk about, you're happy to do so. So again, it's all about steering the conversation rather than waffling through. And that kind of comes back to the communication piece, where it's how you say it as opposed to what you say.
Yeah, absolutely. And you seem to be all asking the key questions, because that's something we were going to touch on, is when you are throwing that tricky question and you either just blank, whether it's commercial awareness or something else, or you just don't know how to answer it. To give you an example, when I started here 7 years ago, Tara's predecessor asked me a question, and to this day I still am unsure what I was asked, and I said exactly that. I said, I don't know the answer, but I'll research it. Now, to say I never got back to her on it, I didn't, but I'm still here and they haven't got rid of me just yet. So I just didn't know the answer, and I was just upfront and honest about it. So I think sometimes the waffle can do more damage than just saying, I just don't know that answer, but you know what, I'm going to actually look that up when I'm finished here today. So that's a great question, thank you. Just going back to that profile question, yes, Orla, I do mean the introduction piece. I've heard it's always important to get that right, because that'd be the first impression when you send a CV. Well, Tara might be able to give advice on, you know, a CV and a profile. What I will say first, though, is we don't actually ask for like a profile piece on your application. It feeds kind of through the application, so you don't have to have a paragraph or two at the very start of our application. But Tara, in terms of CV, because a lot of people here in this call will be looking for interning work or paralegal work, what advice have you got on that profile piece? Because I do find it is the hardest piece sometimes to write.
Yeah, and apologies for not copying that on the initial question. So what I would say to you is it is probably important, if you are sending out a CV for the traineeship and the internships, they're all application forms. To be honest, most of the top firms have an application form, but just generally. So if you take into consideration that most HR departments receive in hundreds, if not nearly thousands of CVs around a particular time, your profile piece is your moment to kind of catch the eye. So depending on the firm and depending on the role, you will change that. So if it's an internship role, you could say, you know, a recently graduated law student with an average of 2.1 with a specific interest in X, depending on the role, or, you know, a law student with 5 years work experience, currently sitting a degree, whatever it may be, whether it's law, whether it's not, whatever you want your selling point to be, or whatever you want me as the HR person reading your CV to see that makes me go, actually, I'm going to read the rest of that. So really what that is a summary of the rest of your CV, but you will change. What people sometimes do is they leave their profile, they create their CV and then leave it and pull it out every time they see a job and just send it over as it is. And that's kind of doing yourself a little bit of a disservice. What I would say is look to see what the job is and change your profile. You know, don't change it to match if it's not true, but look to see what they're looking for and pull out the pieces of your CV and put those in your introduction. It should be about 4 or 5 lines long, and it should be that I will read through that, or Orla or Keen, and go, oh, actually this person could be a match, and then we read the rest of your CV. Excuse me, the CV. If the rest of it, if it doesn't match, we're kind of looking at your CV, but we're not looking at it with the, oh, that kind of attitude. It's more so, yeah, that looks like it could be. So that's the profile piece. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. And that applies, I think, to the cover letter as well. You know, don't just send off the same cover letter to everyone. It's similar to the profile. It should be amended to the firm and amended to that role. So bear that in mind with the cover letters as well. Great. Another question, what is the ideal number of sittings for the FE1s for the screening process? Is 2 sittings preferred over 3, or does it matter? I suppose I'll start this and Tara might pick up. It doesn't actually matter for our screening process. So we don't mind how many FE1s you have. Where we do kind of step in is that, you know, if we offer you a traineeship in 2022, you know, you need to have got those FE1s by the March of that year. So if I was starting my traineeship here in 2022, I need to have my FE1s completed by March 2022. So it's more trying to fit them in within that time frame. But for the screening process, again, it's not that we look at somebody with 8 FE1s and 0 and say, okay, the 0 FE1s, no, look, we won't put them through this year. They might actually have a stronger application to be a better fit for the company than somebody that has completed all their 8 FE1s. But that person with all 8 FE1s, if we're recruiting for 2022 this year and a place became available in 2021, they ideally may be able to slot in. And that's, I suppose, the only benefit from my side, I think. Tara, is there anything you would add there on the FE1s?
Yeah, the ideal number of sittings is the amount of time it takes you to pass them, really. So, I mean, if you are confident that you will pass them in 2 sittings, by all means, it's good to get them done in 2 sittings. If you're not confident in that, it's better for you to do them in the 3 sittings. We will ask, or I would ask at interviews, you know, how many sittings did it take, but that's just to get a sense of yourself. And we appreciate that the FE1s are probably one of the hardest exams that you'll sit, because in my view, is because there's no tell. Usually when you're going into exams, you kind of have a sense of what may be asked and you make a judgment call on what you'll cover. Whereas the FE1s, it's a memory game, really, in many ways, and luck to a certain extent. So there's no ideal number of sittings other than how many you can comfortably pass them in.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tara, I might throw this question at you as well. And does age factor into the traineeship or internship recruitment?
No, not at all. I mean, we have trainees that are at very different stages of life, and so it doesn't matter from that stage. What sometimes we find is the more mature candidates, or the candidates that have a little bit more experience, sometimes they're nearly trying to justify that they have that experience and they're not seeing it necessarily as a positive. That's a very general statement, but that's kind of what can sometimes happen at an interview, is that they're trying to justify all this experience rather than saying, look what I have to offer. I have this here, or whatever it may be, from an education, and I have this experience, and they tend to kind of try and pigeonhole into a certain piece of their experience. So just own your experience and see that very much as it is, as a positive. So it doesn't play into it. As I said, we've, in our traineeship program at the moment, we've people are at very different stages of life and experience, and backgrounds, to be honest. We've students that are coming from, you know, a politics. We've one trainee that was from a midwifery background, and we have lots of different backgrounds, which really makes for, you know, not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So I hope that answered the question there.
Great. And we might just take one more question. I know there's a few more in, but we'll take them offline and we can actually come back to you directly on them. But the last question, which we do see often, is this question is where they have an undergraduate degree in politics, and they have started a postgrad and LLB degree. So the question is, do they include the LLB because it's law related in the undergrad section and not include their undergrad section? Or should they keep their undergrad as politics and then include the LLB in the postgrad with what they've studied in the results? Does that make sense? Tara?
Yes, sorry, I'm just reading it there. So, my undergraduate degree is politics, and I'm currently. To be honest, it doesn't. Once we have them listed, whichever you feel more comfortable with, in the way, I think I'm reading from that it's in the flow of the application form. So what I would say is, you know, both are as relevant as each other. And if you just want to write a note, so if you put in your postgraduate and then your undergraduate and just note it, if there's not enough space on the form, or when you're sending it in, put it as a, you know, as an addendum to it, that's fine. Because we would need to know about both, because they're both as relevant.
Yeah, and we get a lot of people coming through that you know, you're doing your postgrad LLB degree, but we get a lot of people through that haven't studied law, have maybe studied business or politics, and that they're really interesting candidates too as well, because it's diverse and it's different. So I definitely would not exclude anything along those lines, but always include it. So again, there's more questions coming in. Thank you so much. We'll touch on one more and then I'll ask the panel to close off because I think this is a good question. How do you strike the right balance between looking interested in an international firm as opposed to possibly looking like a flight risk? Cian or Tara, would either of you mind taking that question?
It's a tricky question. So in terms of being interested in an interview, being interested in a role, I mean, you think about it, whilst we have offices internationally, we practice law in Ireland and we're Irish qualified. So if you train in the law side of Ireland, you're Irish qualified. So, you know, we don't really look at it as if you know, is this person a flight risk before they even join? We look at the best candidate at the time of the interview. And if they're interested internationally, that's for us is an absolute benefit, because as you said at the top of this webinar, I deal day in, day out with my German colleagues, my Dutch colleagues, UK, over in the States as well. So to have the international understanding and the ability to communicate with them is an absolute advantage. And I'd see it as that. I wouldn't see, or certainly from my perspective, I wouldn't be able to twist it into a negative, say, okay, this person's going to be a flight risk and they're going to be moving jurisdictions and they're going to have to retrain and all that. So no, absolutely. If you're interested in international aspects, you're interviewing for an international law firm if you're talking to us. So you should absolutely play it up.
I do think, though, there is a fine line, Cian, in that we had a couple of interviews previously where people have openly said that they wanted to train in Ireland, but they wanted to then move and travel. And you can do that within Eversheds Sutherland. So, I mean, we do have people that train and work with ourselves and then decide they want to move abroad, and we've organised for them to move to one of our international offices. So that is a positive. But it would, if you're very definite about, you know, moving away as soon as your traineeship is finished, there is a fine line. That's the only piece I'd kind of say just to be kind of careful on, because we don't expect people to sign up their lives to us through a traineeship, but there is kind of, we would like people to stay for a little bit after the traineeship is covered. And Orla, I know you want to finish up, so I'm really sorry, but I've just spotted the last, I know you said one question, but I just spotted the last question there, and I think it's really important. So if we can just answer that one, that'd be really
sure, fire away.
So somebody asked, would you see charitable work pursued alongside university and work as incompatible with the culture of a commercial law firm? So what I would say to that is it's not all just in a commercial law firm, all about money and all about deals. And, you know, a huge amount of the work we do is, you know, on the CSR and the pro bono piece as well. So we try and balance it. And as well as that, it's not that cutthroat that they are incompatible, because a lot of our work is in that area. I mean, our healthcare section, you know, and actually all of our section, Cian, in the real estate, there's a lot of work that's compatible with that side of things. So we would see charitable work as a real positive. The only way it would turn into something that would be, and it's not a negative, but wouldn't be a match for our firm, is if that's where you wanted to qualify, or that's where you wanted your experience to be. Would be in a pro bono rotation, or would to be in, you know, a human rights rotation. We just don't have the capacity to facilitate that at the moment. But as a person and as a cultural fit, that is absolutely a positive. Sorry, Orla.
No, and on that, it's a really good question. Thank you. We have a session on Wednesday called Outside the Deals, if some of you may be signed up for it already, and it's actually touching on, it's all about our CSO work, our diversity work and our pro bono work. So that'll give you a really good sense of our culture and some of that work that we do. We're very conscious that a lot of you are doing charitable work in university or have interest in universities. So you want to join a firm where you can carry that on and you can continue that into maybe some of the committee work that the firm does. So that's on Wednesday, and it's called Outside Deals. So my very last question to Tara and Cian, so that I'm conscious of your time, just to very briefly bring it back to Eversheds Sutherland, what are we looking for at Eversheds Sutherland at interview? And we'll finish with that question.
Okay, well, I'll kick off. I guess we're looking for someone who's clever, someone who can stand on their own 2 feet, who we feel that we could introduce to clients. So while we talk about academics being important, my view is they get you the interview, but it's your interview and your your skills and your communication that gets you the job. So I guess in terms of what I would look at more closely than academics would be what you mentioned, or the right culture, the right fit. Because I tend to see our firm with a very entrepreneurial focus. So we want trainees who want to work hard. We want trainees who can challenge, who can add value, who are happy to meet clients, who want to input throughout the deal rather than just sit back and coast through. So it's really the right fit that we tend to look for. And then to link it back to one of the questions we had about being open. So I, again, would want to see someone who are open, who's up for the challenge, and not somebody who would come in and say, I want to work in real estate and that's all I want to do. So for me, the trick will be how you can communicate that in 30 minutes, because there's not a lot of time, but that's what's going to set you apart from the next person, your ability to communicate your message better than the next person.
Yeah, absolutely. Tara, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that covers it all, really. It is that piece of fit for firm, because it is very hard for you to get a sense of us without coming in and face to face. And that's what we usually find either at the careers fairs, the presentations we hold, that people come in and say, okay, this feels like a place I want to be. And alternatively, some people say, actually, this doesn't fit like it's for me. And as Keane said, you know, and from our experience with other law firms, from me working in them and from Keane and Orla, is that, you know, there are law firms that will be a match for you. Some of the law firms, it's all about the academics and it's all about that piece, and that is great, and you'll find your firm. With Eversheds Sutherland, it's more about, you know, the more rounded kind of experience that you have and that you're fit to the firm. And as well as that, because we have the size of the firm is a little bit smaller than the other top tier firms, so you're on a small team, so it means you get very involved in deals, but you do a bit of everything, you know, and you have to be open to do a bit of everything. So, you know, it is that, going back to that Keane piece that Keane mentioned, it's someone that wants to get stuck in and learn and be part of a team, and team is the main thing that we would look for, and the people would fit there and work together. So I hope that was of some help.
Great, thank you. So just to finish off, thank you so much for all of your questions and for logging on today to listen to us. Thank you to the panel. What we hope today is that you walk away feeling more confident about these virtual interviews and have a little bit more, few more tips and tricks in terms of how to get on in them. Any questions coming through now, I will answer after the session later on today as well. But thank you so much for logging on. Hopefully we'll see some of you in some of our other sessions later on the week. And best of luck to everybody who's applying for traineeships and interviews this year. Thanks so much. Thanks to the panel again.